Where do you think the economy goes from here?
Everything that happens has causes to make it happen, and so it's like a machine. So there are five major forces that work together to determine how this thing works. The world order is changing. Those five forces are first, credit, money, debt, force. In other words, the way that works is you get credit, that's buying power, it produces debt, you have to pay it back, but the buying produces economic output. So there's that cycle. You have too much debt, you have a problem, and you have to go through an adjustment process. There's a mechanics to that. The second one that you're talking about is the internal order and disorder changing domestic order. Traditionally, there's the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans, and there are times when they're very, very different and they're fighting to win at all cost. And that can be disruptive, and how that works is important. The third one is the international order. There's a system of how countries operate with each other. That's the order. And there's a dynamic for that. Number four is acts of nature. Droughts, floods, and pandemics are a force, a big force. Nature is a big force. And so climate change and so on is important. And number five is technology. Man's inventiveness that produces technologies, they have an effect. And they all interact. So what you've done, you've brought us back to what is the most consequential development of that second force, this internal order and disorder. Fortunately, we had a situation where there's a fairly clear mandate, and they were not arguing about the elections. So we've had an orderly transition of power from the left, the Democrats and so on, to rather hard right. That represents two important forces. I'll say them, give the headlines, and then go below that. First, in reforms, internal reforms, to reform the government and to reform the country in certain ways that I'll get into in a second. And second, internationally, the preparation for war doesn't mean we're going to have war, but to be prepared for war and to have a type of war with the rising power, China, and then its allies, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea are considered that other side. You're going to see the country run and the government run a lot more like a capitalist business, in which imagine a new leader comes in and you have an old company that's not doing so well. Maybe that's IBM or Boeing or something. And they're coming in and they're doing a renovation. And so you're going to see technologies be used. You're going to see a game plan develop to make the government run in a more efficient and cost-efficient way. And you're going to see what we call an industrial policy, which is a policy for the country, the business, to operate that rather than a purely free market economy. In other words, it'll have direction. You're going to see deregulation. You're going to see changes in legislation. You're going to see an emphasis for it to be productive and to be effective, with an eye on what that means internationally and the competition. For example, in technology, you either win the technology war or you lose the technology war. The technology war means if you win it economically. Whoever the winner is will win it economically and will win it militarily. So that internationally, we have that same competition. That changes the role of the United States. We have an America First policy, okay? No longer the world order as it was. The world order as it was after World War II was that how do we work with each other in those countries? What are the rules? And establishing a rule-based, what we would say also a moral-driven type of world order, in which there are multinational organizations such as the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, the IMF, and all those organizations operating by a set of rules. That's obsolete now. We now have an America First policy, in which then other countries are increasingly pressured to be with us or against us. And now you're seeing this line up in preparation for what side are you on? So that is the change that we're going to see. And we are in the process of developing. You're going to have more strong-armed conflict, a much more muscular power and testing of powers and getting it around that. You're going to have much less following the United States. It wasn't long ago, that the United States only had to hint at some countries what it wanted, and they would get the message, and they'd probably pretty much fall in line because that was the order and also the power of the United States. Now that's no longer the case. And so you're going to see a more fragmented policy in which most countries are interested in what's good for them and how do they pursue that. So you're going to see some countries align with one side or the other, and most countries in the world not align and do deals. And so that will be a much more fragmented type of policy.